Picture this, a vast steppe stretching into eternity. The wind whistles across endless grass that bends like waves in an ocean of silence. The air is sharp with dust and the faint musk of horse sweat. Under a swollen red dawn, a camp lies scattered with fires gone cold. Only the crows still feast on what remains of last night. You hear hooves, slow, deliberate. A line of riders approaches their captives, each figure wrapped in furs and leather, eyes narrowed against the wind, but their intent colder than the frost itself. This was the world of Genghis Khan, a man both feared and worshipped, a storm of flesh and will who reshaped the earth itself. Yet behind the thunder of conquest lurked another shadow, a darkness whispered in the tents of women, in the tears of children, in the silence of men who dared not speak. Imagine standing in that silence, your hands bound, your wife or sister pulled away by warriors who looked upon her not as human but as spoil. For them desire was not tenderness, it was domination. Was a weapon sharper than any sword. What followed would shatter millions of lives. It would not only redraw maps, it would stain bloodlines forever. For Genghis Khan's empire was not built solely on war. It was built on the most intimate violation. A human can endure. The chronicles tell us of his armies sweeping through kingdoms, cities burned to ash skies blackened with smoke. But beneath the clash of steel, another story unfolded quietly. The taking of women as trophies, the breaking of bodies as a demonstration of power. The Mongols measured victory not just in the corpses of enemies, but in the number of women captured, each one reduced to a currency of domination. And at the center stood Genghis himself, a man whose appetite was legend, not because it was human, but because it was boundless. Historians whisper that he fathered more children than any other man in history, that today, 1 in every 200 men carries his genetic shadow. The stories are chilling. When a city fell, the gates opened, not only to fire, but to terror families torn apart. Women handed from soldier to soldier, each act of violation justified as the right of the victor. For the Mongols saw women as the final seal of conquest, the last humiliation to prove domination complete. In the yurt of the Khan himself, silence was never gentle. There was always the rustle of silk being pulled aside, the sob of another woman brought before him. Some were queens and princesses stolen from fallen dynasties. Others, simple villagers dragged. From fields to him, rank did not matter. Every woman was reduced to the same fate. Psychologists today might call it the hunger of a man who once knew abandonment. Temujin, the boy who became Genghis, was born into betrayal. His father poisoned, his family cast out to starve. Perhaps deep within him grew a desperate need to control what once slipped from his hands. Power became his only refuge, and sex became another battlefield. This was not intimacy, it was strategy. Every union, another alliance forged in flesh. Every child, another legacy, binding conquered blood to Mongol rule. Where the sword could not hold the womb, would. But pause here for a breath. If you are still with me in this darkness, take a moment to steady yourself. This channel exists to unearth what history buries. If you feel the weight of these stories, I invite you to subscribe, not for numbers, but so that together we may keep remembering the voices that were silenced now. As we delve deeper, the empire expanded like fire carried by the wind, from China to Persia to the edge of Europe. Each conquest left behind not only ruins, but descendants. Imagine the echo of footsteps in Samarkand's palaces, where silk curtains once veiled queens, now torn and stained by nights of fear, or in the villages of the north, where mothers whispered lullabies to children who bore the face of their conqueror. To the Mongols, this was victory. To the victims, it was a life sentence for each child, carried the blood of the man who destroyed their world, and women became prisoners, even within their own bodies. In Persia, a chronicler wrote of nobles forced to present their daughters as tribute girls who once played in palace gardens, now sent into tents they would never leave. Their silence bought their family's survival, but survival carved out of despair. In northern China, the cries of women could be heard long after the fires died. Temples desecrated, nuns stripped from cloisters. No sacred vow was stronger than Mongol hunger. In the eyes of the horde, every woman was a prize, every prize proof of conquest. The cruelty did not stop with capture. It lingered in ritual humiliation. Some women were paraded before entire armies, their dignity stripped. Away like armor, others forced into marriages they never chose. Their children raised not as heirs of their lineage, but as pawns of Mongol rule. And what of those who resisted? They were silenced swiftly. Death was mercy compared to what others endured. 4. The Mongols understood fear. They knew that breaking one woman in public could silence 1,000 others in secret. Imagine a torch flickering in the cold night, a woman kneeling in chains before the Khan's men, her tears freezing on her cheeks as laughter circled her like wolves. That image, once seen by villagers, would spread faster than fire. Obedience became instinct, defiance extinguished before it could spark. Historians often marvel at Genghis Khan's discipline in battle, his brilliant strategies, his strict codes for his soldiers. But behind those codes was contradiction. The same man who outlawed theft among his own people sanctioned the theft of human dignity from every conquered nation. This duality makes his story more terrifying. He was not chaos. Without reason, he was order twisted into cruelty. He saw conquest as natural, and for him, possession of women was simply another form of territory. Yet within this darkness glimmered resilience. Not all voices were silenced forever. Some women endured, survived nights that broke others. They found ways to protect their children, to pass down memories, to carve out fragments of dignity where none should have survived. In whispers they shared songs. In secret, they held rituals of remembrance. Every lullaby, a form of rebellion. Every memory kept alive an act of resistance against the empire that sought to erase them. And though their names may be lost, their silence is not empty. It is a silence heavy with meaning, a silence that still echoes in the bloodlines of today. But we are only at the beginning of this story. The empire has only just begun to rise, and the horrors waiting in its shadow have yet to unfold. For what comes next is darker still. The Khan will not only take women, he will use them as pawns, to break kingdoms, to lure rulers into traps, to weaponize intimacy as a tool of war. And in that strategy lies the most chilling truth of all, that love itself could be twisted into conquest. Picture once more the endless horizon of the steppe banners, snapping in the wind, warriors sharpening blades on wet stones. But within the Khan's camp, another kind of preparation was unfolding, not for war, but for possession. Envoys from fallen kingdoms arrived bearing tributes, gold horses, silks, and always daughters, a trembling line of young women presented like offerings to a god who never blessed, only consumed. This was politics written upon the skin of the innocent, a new form of diplomacy, where a girl's body became a treaty, where refusal meant annihilation. Imagine the silence of a father forced to hand over his child, his eyes locked on the ground, because to look at her was unbearable, because he knew he was not protecting her, but delivering her into darkness. What followed was not ceremony, it was inspection. The Khan's officials examined hair-teeth skin, reducing humanity to livestock, and when a girl was chosen, she vanished into the yurt of power, her screams muffled by felt walls, her future erased. Some resisted, some chose death rather than subjugation. Persian account tells of noble women who leapt from city walls as the Mongols stormed in, their bodies broken on the stones below, yet their choice was an act of defiance. Better the silence of death than the silence of captivity. But not all were given that choice. In many cities, women were locked inside mosques or palaces, held for days, while soldiers decided their fate. The air heavy with incense mingled with sweat, the prayers carved into the walls powerless against the laughter of the conquerors. In such moments even gods seemed absent. Only the sky watched wide and indifferent. The Khan himself weaponized marriage as strategy. A queen from a defeated dynasty might be forced into his embrace, not for love, not for companionship, but to legitimize his rule over her people. Each child born became a living seal of conquest, a bloodline stitched together by force. This was not devotion, it was control. A perverse rewriting of family, where lineage was not heritage but captivity made flesh. This legacy, as we've seen, turns statistics into stories of coercion. Imagine one such night, the camp quiet except for distant howls of wolves. Inside the Khan's tent, the air thick with smoke from burning herbs. A young woman kneels, her wrists bound with silken cords, her face streaked with tears. She whispers prayers in a language the Khan does not understand. He leans closer, not to listen, but to silence. And when dawn comes, she will walk from the tent, carrying a new shadow inside her, a shadow that will follow her for the rest of her life. Psychologically, this was conquest, perfected, forcing, intimacy, broke more than walls. It dissolved resistance from within. Generations of children carried dual-blood Mongol and conquered forever, binding their nations to the empire. How could they rise against fathers they could not deny? How could they resist when their very existence was proof of conquest? The cruelty was invisible, yet permanent, a wound that did not bleed, but endured through centuries. Meanwhile, the soldiers followed the Khan's example. What he embodied, they repeated. Armies swept through villages, taking what they wanted. To them, women were as plunder as horses or grain. But unlike horses, women could not be replaced. Their suffering lingered, their silence echoed in cradles, long after the army rode away. Some women bore children they could not love. Others raised them in bitterness, yet tenderness too, because within tragedy, survival still persisted. Mothers teaching children lullabies of lands they would never see. Stories of fathers lost, dreams of freedom whispered into ears too young to understand. For even under the weight of violation, the human spirit sought ways to endure, to weave threads of love in a fabric torn apart by conquest. The cruelty extended beyond the personal into the symbolic. The Khan sometimes demanded the wives of defeated rulers for himself. It was not desire, but humiliation. To sleep with the queen of an enemy was to crush his legacy completely. Imagine the terror of a queen torn from her palace, her jewels ripped away, her body turned into a message. Your dynasty is gone. Your lineage belongs to me. This was power not only physical, but psychological, a theater of domination staged in the most intimate chamber of all. Yet for all this violence, there were moments when silence screamed louder than any actor child born in the yurt of captivity. His first cry piercing the dawn, the mother staring at him, not with joy, but with hollow resignation. For she knew his face bore the features of her conqueror, and still she would hold him close, because love endures even when history is cruel. This paradox breaks the heart. That tenderness can exist inside coercion. That resilience can bloom even in soil soaked with grief. Step back for a moment, look at the vast sweep of empire. From the Pacific Ocean to the edges of Hungary, every region touched by Mongol conquest carries whispers of this practice. From royal courts of China to the deserts of Khwarezm, from the steppes of Russia to the gardens of Persia, each place bears scars not written in stone but in bloodline. Modern genetics confirms what chronicles hinted millions today descend from Genghis Khan. But this is not heritage to celebrate. It is a reminder of how violence inscribed itself upon the map of humanity. Imagine the weight of that silence. Countless women never named in records, their bodies turned into pages on which history wrote without consent, their children never knowing whether to curse or revere the blood in their veins even. Allies were not spared. Genghis offered daughters of his own family in marriage to generals and rulers. Yet this too was not affection but weapon. He used his female relatives as tools of alliance, as living bonds to ensure loyalty. Their wills irrelevant. Their lives traded as currency of empire. To them, it must have felt like gilded captivity, silken tents, jewels glittering, but beneath it chains all the same. And here lies another paradox. The same system that violated enemy women also bound Mongol women in duty. No female body escaped the empire's hunger for power. The consequences stretched far beyond one generation. Children of mixed lineage often became leaders themselves, their existence proof that conquest could never be undone. Entire dynasties carried the blood of a man who once rode across the steppe with nothing but hunger in his heart. And so domination perpetuated itself invisibly, through veins, through names, through the quiet passing of features from parent to child. This was empire without walls, an empire built not only on battlefields, but in bedrooms. Every birth, another conquest, every cradle, another victory. But with each victory came despair, the silence of women who vanished from record, the silence of men who could not protect them, the silence of children who grew up with questions unanswered. This silence is the truest monument of Genghis Khan's practices, invisible, unwritten, yet heavier than any stone. And it is this silence that we must listen to, for within it lies the echo of suffering that shaped the world we inherited. Yet the story is not finished. The Khan's empire will soon face its greatest expansions, and with it greater acts of cruelty disguised as strategy. Women will be used not only as prizes, but as lures, as traps, as instruments, to break whole kingdoms from within. What happens when intimacy itself becomes a weapon of statecraft? What happens when the line between family and enemy dissolves entirely? That is where we must go next. Into the darkest chambers of empire where even trust itself was poisoned. Picture a palace deep within a conquered land, marble floors, still glistening with the polish of vanished servants, columns cracked from fire, yet standing proud. Within its walls a queen sits in silence, her crown stripped from her head, her silks torn. Away, the once sacred halls of her ancestors now echo with foreign laughter. She is no longer ruler but spoil, and soon her fate will become a message to her people. For the Khan has claimed her, not to honor, but to humiliate, not to protect, but to possess her. Body transformed into a declaration of absolute defeat. Such scenes repeated across continents. Royal women carried across deserts and mountains. Some locked within guarded tents in Mongolia, others sent as gifts to generals, each one reduced to a token. In the endless game of control, it was not enough for the Mongols to topple thrones. They needed to consume what those thrones cherished most. And so a queen's bedchamber became a battlefield, more enduring than any wall. Imagine the silence of her attendants forced to watch their mistress handed away, unable to resist, their eyes lowered as though darkness might shield them. But nothing shielded them, for the empire consumed witnesses as easily as victims. Here lies the most chilling truth. That intimacy itself became weaponized strategy. The Khan and his generals knew the bond between ruler and family. To violate that bond was to fracture loyalty forever. If a queen carried the child of her conqueror, her people could never look upon her as before her. Dynasty forever tainted by the blood of the enemy. This was psychological warfare, more corrosive than fire, more lasting than the sword. Sometimes women themselves were forced into roles of spies or pawns. A princess sent as bride to a rival, carrying messages, hidden in her hairpins. Her loyalty torn between the family she left behind and the man who now owned her. Each smile at a banquet, a mask. Each touch in the bedchamber. A wound. To live like this was to exist in permanent fracture, neither wife nor prisoner. Fully, but both at once, her soul split by conquest. For the soldiers, the practice grew ritualistic. When a city fell, looting began, and the order of spoils was clear. First the treasures, then the livestock, then the women, the sound of chains dragging across stone streets, the cries muffled in alleys. These were not accidents of war, they were the war itself. And in the stillness that followed, fire's smoldering temples broken, there lingered a smell sharper than smoke, the smell of fear and despair that clung to walls long after the riders left. Yet amid all this, resilience still flickered. Some women learned to manipulate survival, feigning affection, earning scraps of influence, using whispered words at night to protect their children. It was not power, but it was resistance of another kind, and sometimes even within the Khan's court, women found ways to shape events quietly. Suggestion here, a warning there, a pause in the tent flap that delayed an order long enough to save lives. Tiny acts of defiance woven into the very fabric of captivity. History rarely records them, but without them, perhaps the cruelty would have consumed even more. Step closer into the Khan's private world. At night he surrounded himself with silence, yet silence was never empty. It was filled with the rustle of fabric, the suppressed sob of another captive, the unspoken calculation of alliances built upon flesh. He believed himself chosen by the eternal blue sky, that his conquests were divine mandate, and so he justified even the darkest acts as destiny psychologists today would call it rationalization. A mind so fused with power it no longer distinguished desire from right, conquest from intimacy, love from domination. This is what made his practices so horrific. They were not impulsive cruelties. They were deliberate, systematic, endless. Imagine a scene on the road. A caravan of women marched under guard, their eyes hollow, their voices gone. Some carry infants, others stumble barefoot across stone and dust. Every step a reminder that they will never return, that their world has ended. From the hills, villagers watch in silence. They do not intervene. They cannot, for they know to resist is to vanish under Mongol hooves. So they watch, their own daughters clutched tightly behind shuttered doors, praying the horde does not turn toward them. This is how empires breed silence, through spectacle of terror, through making example of the helpless. This wound echoed through families, shaping secrets across generations. But the Khan's shadow was vast. Even after his death, his descendants carried forward the same practices. Wives seized queens, stripped of dignity, entire dynasties remade in the language of conquest. And so, the silence multiplied from mother to daughter, from daughter to granddaughter, until entire cultures carried the memory, not in words, but in wary glances, in unspoken grief, in lullabies sung softer than breath. Return now to the darkest heart of empire, for as the Mongol expanded into Europe, the practices continued. Villages, burned churches, stripped nuns and novices, dragged from cloisters, sacred vows, shattered as easily as stone walls. The chronicles of Kiev speak of screams rising from monasteries, of children born in shadow, never baptized, of faith itself humiliated by conquest. The Mongols respected no boundary, neither holy ground nor sacred vow. For them all was property of the empire, even the soul. What then of legacy? What then of memory? Today geneticists point to millions, carrying traces of the Khan's lineage. But what science calls heritage, history names violation. Each strand of DNA another page, in a book written without consent. The walls of Samarkand, the temples of China, the churches of Rus, they are silent now, but silence is not empty. It is full of what cannot be spoken. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the faintest echoes of chains, the rustle of silk torn away, the breath of a mother singing her child to sleep in a tongue she knows he will forget. The empire begins to fracture, as all empires do, but its shadow endures. Not in monuments, but in bloodlines. Not in glory, but in silence. For the most horrific practices of Genghis Khan were not carved into stone tablets. They were carved into human bodies, into generations, into the unspoken. And still one question remains. When conquest reaches so deeply, when even intimacy is turned into war, what is left of love itself? That question lingers as the empire's shadow fades, revealing truths no chronicle could ever capture.